Yo, what up guys, I'm Sammy, welcome back to the Soul Drop. In this video, we're going to be talking about the bounciest basketball shoes that you can get right now. And bouncy has to do with two aspects of a basketball shoe in my personal opinion, right? And also because of the improvement in technology in recent years, shoes have been getting really bouncy, which is absolutely amazing. So the first aspect, of course, is cushion, right? The cushioning setup, how bouncy is it? So there's two aspects to that as well. So the actual midsole, right? If a shoe has an exposed midsole and the foam is actually itself bouncy, whether it's using Zoom or a traditional foam, that can add bounce to the overall shoe, right? But also there can be like a cushioning setup underneath your foot for like a soft mesh strobel board, or of course Zoom strobel where it's like super duper bouncy right underneath your foot. So of course that's one aspect of being bouncy, right? Second aspect is when a shoe has kind of like a full length carbon plate. For example, in like the Wild 10, and it's just extremely bouncy for heel to toe transition, right? So out of your first step, you feel extremely quick, or just like running down the court for heel to toe transition, it kind of gives you that little springiness, a little pep in your step, if you will. So that helps also for bounce. So yeah, there are a good amount of bouncy shoes in this list. So if you guys do want to cop any of these shoes, I try to leave them the affiliate link in the description box. If you do choose to get any of these shoes, it does help me out if you get the shoe from the affiliate link down in the description box, or kind of like the product pictures underneath this video, or like right over here. And as always, thank you guys so much for all the support. But let's get it started off with the bounciest setups that you can get. And it's kind of like in categories. I have first the bounciest, and then underneath that, like in the second tier, we got still bouncy, but not as bouncy, So anyways, let's get it started right off with the Nike GT Cut 3. So I don't know what it is with that shoe, but it has Zoom X, right? So Zoom X is pretty bouncy, right? It's also very soft, but they definitely did stiffen it up in the Zoom GT Cut 3. There's not as much compression from the actual like midsole, but then like once you get going, you start running and you break in the cushioning setup a little bit. There is a cutout in the heel that does start to get a little bouncy, So that helps, but the bouncy part about that shoe is the forefoot, right? The forefoot actually has a good amount of give, and I have the shoe right over here actually, so I can show you. So right here in the forefoot, it has a good amount of tension. It's not super easy to bend, so you kind of bend it and then it kind of like springs you forward, which gives it a nice, right, a springiness to it, which feels really nice, especially out of your first step. So that feels extremely nice and bouncy. Next, of course, we got the Leing 4, right? So also that cushioning setup is really bouncy, kind of opposite of the GT Cut 3. The GT Cut 3 isn't super bouncy for the cushioning setup, but the Leing 4 is extremely bouncy. It's using full length boom, and then it has kind of like this foam strobel board, which I feel like helps add bounce to the actual full length boom. But then underneath your foot, you have a lot of bounce, and it reminds me of Zoom a little bit, but it's just like kind of more comfortable. So that helps. And also another thing that helps about that is it's kind of full length, but it's also kind of like a fork shaped plate in the forefoot. It kind of extends into the forefoot and gives you nice bounce in the forefoot as well. A nice little springiness too, So the Leing 4 is probably combining, the two categories the best out of any of these shoes on this list if you want a lot of bounce, right? So there's that. Next, also we got the JB2. The JB2 also, just like the Leing 4, has a good amount of bounce for the cushioning setup. I would say the Leing 4 is a little bit bouncier, however, but the JB2, it has full length boom, and also it has a full length carbon fiber setup as well. So it adds a good amount of springiness to the overall shoe, with the cushioning setup being bouncy right underneath your foot, which feels really nice. So it kind of propels you forward and gives you that nice pep in your step, All right, next, of course, you can't forget about the GT Jump 2. And yeah, it's kind of an old shoe, but if you want an extreme amount of bounce, it has a full length Zoom strobel unit, has that React foam in the heel, which has a lot of compression, and the Zoom units in the forefoot. So if you want crazy cushion, that's kind of like the cushion to get. You can't get much bouncier and much crazier than that, of course. So there is a GT Jump 2, and of course any shoe with a full length Zoom strobel unit is going to be extremely bouncy for the cushioning setup. So we got, of course, the GT Hustle 2. That shoe is really flexible in the forefoot though, so you don't get that springiness, but if you want a lot of bounce from your actual cushioning setup, then you should get the GT Hustle 2. Same thing with the Jordan 38 or the Jordan 38 Low. You have a full length Zoom strobel unit. It's not super springy either, it's kind of more just flexible in the forefoot, but of course for the cushioning setup, you have that zoom unit, which is extremely bouncy. Next, of course, we got the LeBron 21, right? So it is a lot more subtle than, of course, a full-length zoom strobo unit. It's using a zoom turbo unit in the forefoot, which is top-loaded, but of course, it's not like a strobo unit, you know? And also we have a good amount of compression in the heel, but it's also not super bouncy. And in the forefoot, it has a little bit of give to it as well, but it's not super springy. So the LeBron 21 does have a little bit of bounce as well, but not as much as all the other shoes that I just mentioned, right? And of course, we got the Zion 3. The Zion 3 is just, it's not super springy either. It's a really, really flexible shoe. And also does feel a little clunky in the heel, right? But because of that drop in midsole, we have full length Formula 23 foam, which is really, really nice, super duper comfortable, and adds a little bit of bounce in the heel. And also we have that bottom load zooming in the forefoot, which does add a lot of bounce in the forefoot. But also if you want a lot of bounce, you can get the Zion 3 SE, which has a full length zoom unit underneath the drop in, but it's a crappy shoe. So I would suggest not getting it because I hated that shoe. But if you want a bouncy cushioning setup, you can get that, you know? All right, next we kind of have like our bottom tier, you know, it's not as bouncy as the shoes that I just mentioned, but they're still bouncy, you know what I mean? So let's get it started right off with the AE1. So the AE1, you have, of course, the boost, right? It's jet boost, and the strobe board is pretty soft, and we have that heel cut out, so it does add a little bit of bounce, just a nice subtle bounce. Kind of like underneath your foot, underneath your entire foot, right? So that does feel extremely nice. And also we have that full length plate right underneath your foot. So that does add a little bit of springiness to the overall shoe as well. It's not as springy as the GT Cut 3 or the Leing 4 or the JB2. Right? But it does add a little bit of bounce to it. So the AE1, and same thing with the Harden Volume 8, pretty much the same exact thing, right? We got the boots right underneath the foot with the cutout, softer strobe board. Next, of course, we got the Shockwave 5 Pro, which was Kyrie Irving's kind of older shoe before the Kai 1. It's using full-length N2 foam. It's really, really thin, so it doesn't add that much bounce comparing it to like the Leing 4 or the JB2, but it still has a little bit like a nice subtle bounce like the AE1, right? But it's a little bit softer for step and comfort because it's using an extremely soft mesh strobe board. So the Shockwave 5 is also pretty dang bouncy. And also we have the Leing 4 V2, right? So Leing 4 V2, I kind of want to put it in the middle of like the first tier and second tier because like the cushioning setup isn't as bouncy as the regular Leing 4, right? The Leing 4, the regular version, has kind of like a softer kind of foam mesh strobe board. And then the V2 is using just like a soft mesh strobe board, right? So I feel like because of that foam strobe board in the regular version, that adds a little bit more bounce than the soft mesh strobe board in the V2. But the V2 is still, it has a nice bounce because it's still full length boom, right? And also, of course, it has that full length kind of plate. It's not full length, it's like 3/4 length, but it still like kind of extends into the forefoot with that fork shape and gives you nice springiness as well. So that's actually a pretty bouncy shoe, right? Next, we got the Jordan Tatum 2 with a full length air strobo unit. So obviously it's not as bouncy as Zoom, but it does add a little bit of bounce, a little bit of pep in your step because, you know, once you get going, it does get a little bit bouncier, right? And it's not super springy, but it does feel a little bit more kind of stiff than like a really, really soft and flexible forefoot, kind of like in Kobe's, right? So it does feel a little bouncy, but I would say it's the least bounciest shoe on this list, but it still has a little bit of bounce because of the air strobe unit, right? And of course, we got shoes like the Kai 1 and the Zap 1 as well. Like the overall cushioning setup is really, really soft. And with the full length N2 foam and the soft mesh strobe board in both of the shoes, it does add a nice little subtle bounce to the shoe as well. But it's not super springy though, right? The overall flex in the shoe is actually pretty flexible. So you're not gonna get that much springiness, but from the actual cushioning setup, you have a little bit of bounce, right? Like a nice subtle bounce. Next, we got the 361 degrees Big 3 5.0 Quick Pro. So with the Quick CQ Tech foam, it's actually pretty dang bouncy, right? It kind of looks like Boost. The strobe board is actually on the stiffer side of things, so it's not super comfortable for step and comfort. However, because it's stiffer, once you get going and you start sprinting and jumping, it adds a little bit of resistance to the actual foam, I guess, and it feels a little bit bouncy, you know? So it's not super bouncy, right? But it adds a little bit of bounce to it. And also the forefoot is a little springy as well. Right, I actually got the shoe right over there. So yeah, it has a nice little spring to it as well. So that's actually pretty dang nice. And last but not least, we got the Player One Plus, and we got the explosive midsole and also the support midsole, right? So these are midsoles that you can actually purchase separately from their site if you want to, and the explosive midsole is actually quite bouncy, but you do need to break it in a little bit. And also the support midsole has a little bit of bounce as well. It's not super bouncy, of course, comparing to like, you know, the first tier, but it does add a little subtle bounce to the overall cushioning setup, which does feel nice. But of course, the Player One Plus does not have any type of spring to it. It's actually very, very flexible and easy to flex. So you're not gonna get any type of springiness to it, but the overall cushioning setup does have a little bit of bounce to it. So anyways, that about wraps it up for bounciest shoes that you can get right now. And if you guys do want to cop any of these shoes, I'll try to leave an affiliate link in the description box. Hope this list helped you guys out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.